Sunday in particular, I love to preach the good news of Christmas. In fact, I love everything there is to love about Christmas. I'm a Christmas nerd all the way through everything. Willing to even put on an ugly Christmas sweater with Charles Spurgeon on it and sweat my way into church on this summer, gross, hot morning. And because I love everything about Christmas. I love the lights. I love putting up the tree. I love hearing the carols playing. I love singing the carols like we've just got done doing now. I even love Christmas shopping in the manic shopping, Robina Town Center when it's crazy. Like, I hate shopping. But I love Christmas shopping. There's just something about the buzz and the energy and the celebration of it all that it's kind of wild. And I love it. It's wild with joy. I remember a few years ago, we were walking around Harbour Town, and Ezra, our third born, he was about four or so at the time, and we're walking around, and it's just crazy. People everywhere getting some last minute gifts. Ezra's tagging along with Dad, and we see this mall Santa just kind of walking around or driving around on his little thing he had, and Ezra kind of looks him from across the mall, the shopping center, and he's like, hey, Christmas guy. So like somehow he'd forgotten Santa's name. That's okay, that's fine. Hey, Christmas guy. And he's like yelling it, trying to get Santa's attention. He's like, hey, Christmas guy. And finally, Mole Santa looks over at him, and Ezra's like, what's your name? He's like, my name's Santa, little boy. What's your name? And Ezra looks him straight in the eye without even flinching, and he goes, Batman. And it just kind of fit, right? Like, it's just a part of the mania of this Christmas season. And the truth is in the midst of it all, and I love it all, but in the midst of all the festivity and joy and parties and in-laws and family and barbecues and all the rest of it, in the midst of the mania, it's easy for us to lose sight of the meaning and the miracle of what Christmas really is. And so I want to go to John chapter 1 this morning and press home into our hearts the meaning of Christmas and the miracle of Christmas. If you have a Bible, go to John chapter 1. If you don't, it'll be up on the screen behind me. And just for what it's worth, if you read the Christmas narrative, right, in Matthew 1 and Luke 1, you get the story of Christmas. You get the history of what went down. There was the shepherds and the angels and the wise men and the long journey to Bethlehem with Joseph and Mary. You get the story of Christmas. Matthew 1 and Luke 1 are like a documentary. John chapter 1, you get the meaning of Christmas. It's almost like a cosmic, behind-the-scenes VIP look of the sheer majesty of what was going on that Christmas night, that first Christmas night where God became man in order to reconcile mankind to God. So John chapter 1 is where we're going to be. I'm going to read verses 1 through 14, and then we're just going to camp out on verse 14. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and made his dwelling place among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. This is the word of the Lord. Verse 14 shows us a few things that I want to look at this Christmas Eve morning. The first thing is that Jesus is fully God. The second thing is that Jesus is also fully man. fully human, not 50-50, 100-100. 100% God, 100% man. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He is fully with us. Fully God, fully man, fully with us. That's the meaning and the miracle of what Christmas is, that I want us just to take the next 20 minutes or so and think about together. And so if you're a Christian, this is a chance to reorient our hearts back to, here's what we're celebrating. The miracle that God came near and is with us. And if you're not a Christian yet, here's the claims of what Christianity makes. Here's what makes Christmas so revolutionary. And the first one is that Jesus is fully God. Notice there that the Word, capitalized, the Word, the Logos, the voice that spoke the universe into being, that holds the universe together, that Word became flesh. So the great I am, God Almighty, King of kings, Lord of lords, that God, the one who created the world and the universe by the word of his power, that's holding it together by the word of his power, the one who raises up and brings down nations and kings, that God, right, the God of Revelation that we just spent 19 weeks looking at as a church, that God, the one to whom Moses said, show me your glory. And God said to him, no, because if I do, you will surely die. That God, we see here, lowers himself into his creation in the weakness of a child. God became flesh, the Word. Christmas is way more. I want us to see this. It's way more than a nice few days off. It's way more than just a fun festivity and celebration. It's way more than just getting the stockpile refreshed when you visit your mom, right? Although we appreciate that. But it's way more than all of the things and all of the busyness and the fun that happens at Christmas. Christmas is revolutionary. Christmas is miracle. God came to us. That means if Christmas is true, that changes everything. God came to us. The King of Kings exchanged his glory for a cradle. The Infinite One clothed himself with vulnerability. The Creator entered into creation. The Alpha and the Omega squeezed himself into time. It's like Shakespeare putting himself on the page of Hamlet, but infinity more so. God came near. The Word became flesh. The second member of the triune God who created the world, God the Son, eternal and co-equal with God the Father and God the Holy Spirit, had come. Would you just consider that for a moment? That the one who precedes time came into time through the womb of a virgin. So you're like, that doesn't really, like that seems a little exceptional. It's what we call it a miracle. This is supernatural. This is something that doesn't happen. It's not a Wednesday. It doesn't just keep rolling around this is a big deal. This is what we're celebrating at Christmas. And Christmas is the message that if you've seen Jesus, if you've come to know Jesus, you've come to know God. The Word became flesh and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father. Now, here's the implications of this. It means you can't just look at Jesus and go, well, I think he was probably a good guy. Like he's probably a nice guy, probably a good teacher, probably a really upright, moral guy, really looked out for the little fellas in the world. Jesus won't let you treat him like that. Like he won't let you treat him like that. You can't treat Jesus like Gandhi 1.0 or Mother Teresa or Buddha or Mary Poppins or whatever. Like if Jesus is who he said he is, if he made the claims he said he made, you've got to take seriously his claim to being God. Right? Like Jesus says things that only God can say. Like, I've come to judge the world. That's something only God can say. Jesus says things like, I forgive you of your sin. That's something only God can do. Jesus says things like, before Abraham was, I am. and takes the holy name of God, the I am who I am, and applies that to himself. That's a radical, radical claim. The Word became flesh. So what will you do with the claims of Jesus? Let me help you out. I'll quote one of the great philosophers of our age, Bono. He said this: when people say, you know, good teacher, prophet, really nice guy, Bono says, this is not how Jesus thought of himself. So you're left with a challenge in that, which is either that Jesus was who he said he was, or a complete and utter nutcase. You have to make a choice on that. C.S. Lewis kind of takes that a little deeper and says, either this was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. So you can shut him up for a fool, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. Jesus claimed to be God. John here is writing that the Word, God, became flesh. And how do we know those claims are true? Well, we look at the countless documented miracles that happened through his life. This is not some ordinary man. We look at the hundreds of prophecies throughout the Old Testament that Jesus fulfilled in his life and birth and living and dying on the cross and resurrection. And Jesus fulfilled hundreds of these prophecies of what the Messiah, the promise of God to save his people, was going to be like. And Jesus fulfilled all of these prophecies. We look at Jesus' sinless life and his death on the cross and his resurrection, which he predicted, by the way, on the third day. And friends, if the resurrection is true, if the resurrection happened, Christmas is true. If the resurrection happened, Christmas is true. If Jesus rose from the grave, then Jesus is not another prophet pointing the way to God. He is the one to whom all the prophets pointed. He is God himself come to us. And that's why we sing songs like, "Oh, come, let us adore him." Christ the Lord. He's fully God. But he's also, and this is something we have to hold in tension, he's fully man, fully God and fully human. Here's what it says: the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So again, come back to that paradox and just consider it for a second. The God eternal, the God who precedes time, entered into time. The one of limitless strength and energy and power and wisdom took on flesh and the limitations of a human body. The sovereign God of the throne kept his divine nature, but laid aside his divine power and rights and entered into a manger. O holy night, the Word became flesh. When Larry King, the famous talk show host, was asked a number of years ago, he did an episode where he was put in the hot seat. So instead of interviewing all the people that he'd done, throughout his career, he was put in the hot seat and interviewed by a number of people. And one of the questions he got asked on that night was, if you could go back in time and interview anyone from history, who would you most want to interview? Larry King. And what kind of questions would you ask them? And Larry King's answer was, I would want to interview Jesus Christ. I would want to ask him if he was indeed virgin born, because the answer to that question would define history. And friends, it did. In fact, it split time in two. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The incarnation just means the enfleshment of God. God put on flesh. And so when God spoke to his people throughout the Old Testament, he spoke to his people through the prophets, and he spoke to his people through a whirlwind one time, and through a pillar of fire, and through a burning bush, and through all these miraculous things. But now he comes to us, and the Word speaks to us through the babbling of a baby, Jesus in the manger. And here's why holding those two things in tension really matters. Because Jesus is fully God, he actually can redeem us and save us. And because Jesus is fully man, he is literally the only one qualified to represent us. Fully God, he can save us. Fully man, he can represent us. That's the language here we have of, we look at the world and the world is broken, and God himself comes and lives the life we couldn't live, and Jesus is our great high priest. He's our representative. He's the one that lives perfectly in obedience to the Father and then gifts his life to all who make their home in him. That's a miracle. That's why I love verses like Hebrews 4:15. It says, for we do not have a high priest, read representative there. We do not have a representative, a high priest, who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. So when we think of God, here's what we're tempted to do. We're tempted to think of God in terms of he must be entirely other, aloof, far away, untouchable, unreachable, godlike. And God is godlike. God is transcendent, absolutely. There is a sense where he is entirely other to us, but there's another sense in which we read here, he understands us. He's not aloof. He's able to sympathize with our weaknesses. He was tempted in every way we are tempted, and yet without sin. This is all in the humanity of Jesus. I love the way one of the Puritan pastors, Thomas Goodwin, put it in his book, The Heart of Christ. And he says that Hebrews 4:15 is like taking our hands and laying them on the chest of Jesus. And it lets us, this verse lets us feel how his heart beats and his affections yearn toward us, even now as he is in glory. So Hebrews 4:15 is like a stethoscope that reaches all the way up to the throne of heaven, that lets us listen in on the beating heart of Christ. And what we find is that his heart beats in sympathy for, in solidarity with his people. He has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. He sympathizes with our weaknesses. He gets you. And here's where the sympathy of Jesus and the solidarity of Jesus, and that he was fully man and experienced all the things in this life as we understand it. Here's where this becomes really good news to struggling saints and sinners like all of us in this room. It's that on the cross, Jesus gives the greatest gift of all. He gifts not only, right, his life for us, he gifts his life to us. And what I mean by that is all of us have fallen short. Biblically speaking, you're on the naughty list, like every one of us. We're all there. We've all fallen short of the glory of God, and yet Jesus came and lived a life of perfect obedience. And the Reformers called this the great exchange, where at the cross, Jesus takes our sin onto himself and the punishment we deserve. And in exchange, he gives to all who trust in his name, his righteousness, his obedience, his life, his moral track record. So if you've failed this week, beloved Christian, let me rephrase that. If you've been alive this week, Jesus is your perfect and holy representative. And the good news is not try harder, do better. It's not, let's frame this more Christmassy. The good news, guys, is not be good for goodness sake. It's way better than that. Like that song came on. I was in Target this week doing some last minute Christmas shopping, and that song came on. You guys know the song, right? Not the Mariah Carey song, that's the other song that comes on. The Santa Claus is Coming to Town song, you guys know the one? We sing it so chipper and jingly, and it's like everyone who sings it's kind of like got this goofy smile of like, you better watch out. And it's like this little happy jingle kind of a thing. But take away the smiling and the jingling music and just read it out loud. Like it's a serial killer song. like just read it in like a Liam Neeson voice or something. It becomes very terrifying. You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout, I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. And then it gets worse. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. So it'd be good for, like, stupidest song ever, right? You better. No, the gospel is so much better than that. The gospel is not be good for goodness sake. The gospel is the word became flesh, and Jesus was good for our sake. And that's why Christians sing like Christ is risen, and we've got the greatest gift in all the world. And it's because Jesus drew near to us. The word became flesh that we can draw near to him. And that's what Hebrews 4:16, the next verse says. So let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Fully God, fully man, fully with us. That's the message of Christmas. God has come near. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, full of grace and truth. Christmas shows us that if it were up to us, none of us are going to climb our way to heaven through our moral track record. We're all on the naughty list. Christmas instead shows us that God has come near to do for us what we could not do for ourselves, to give us the gift we have not deserved and could never earn, to give us himself, to give us life in his name, to give us forgiveness of sins, to give us a rest for our restlessness, and it's all wrapped up in he came to give us him. The gift is in the manger. That's the gift, that's the miracle, that's the meaning, that's the message of what we're singing about this Christmas. Jesus came near, the Word became flesh, full of grace and truth. Truth about what God is like. Truth about where we stand before God, that he would so humble himself to the point of a manger, even more to the point of death on a cross. He's full of truth. If you want to know what God is like, you look at Jesus, who is full of truth, who is the truth of God, but also full of grace. The one who is true came near and is more generous toward us than we've ever imagined. And when we get down to the bottom of it, Christmas really is about gift. God giving the gift of himself. Full of grace and truth. Jesus is the truth to be believed, and Jesus brings grace to be received. It's all grace. That's why verse 12 says, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. So the good news is you don't have to earn Christmas. You don't have to perform for Christmas. You don't have to work for Christmas. You don't deserve it and you haven't merited it. Christmas is gift to all who would receive. That's what the open hands of faith are. Jesus, I'm letting go of trusting in myself as the functional Savior and God over my own life, because I've come to see the truth about you and the truth about me, and I am woefully underqualified for the role of God. And so I'm opening my hands to receive what only you can give and what you promise to give, which is life in your name. That's the gift of Christmas. And so as the band come on up, I want us to remember throughout the midst of all the things going on over these next couple of days, Christmas means, in the middle of it all, God is not far away from any one of us. Christmas means God has come near. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Christmas means that though our sin be great, his grace is greater still. Christmas means that your life can change. And it's not through earning it or achieving it, but receiving what God alone can give. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So let me ask you this morning, do you need grace today? Does your life need mercy? Something unexpectedly undeserved? Are you looking for the truth? The truth about what God is like, the truth about what you are like, the truth about what he has done to bring us home to himself. If you need grace, if you're looking for truth, listen, you could look the world over 1,000 times. And if you go hunting for grace and truth that makes sense of your life, in your job, you won't find it. If you're hunting for grace and truth in your marriage, you won't find it. If you're hunting in wealth and possessions and another trip to scratch the itch of restlessness in your heart, they're all fine, they're all great things, but you won't find it until you get low before God, low enough, in fact, to get on your knees, to look into a manger where there is the infinite one, clothed in vulnerability, full of grace and truth, God's gift to us and God's promise for us that God is with us. Amen.